Hey there, just a heads up, this episode of the Judo Science Podcast was created with help from AI. Some of the voices you'll hear are synthetic, but the ideas come from real research and real judo.
You know, we often think about physical disciplines, maybe martial arts, maybe something else, purely in terms of the body. But what if they go deeper? What if they could fundamentally reshape your mind, your personality, how you handle pretty much everything life throws at you? Today, that's exactly what we're digging into. The really surprising psychology behind martial arts, using judo as our main lens. We've pulled together a stack of research, articles, expert takes, and our mission here is to unpack how these practices aren't just about, throws or grappling. They're like these amazing labs for building personality, cutting down anxiety, and forging some serious mental resilience. It's this idea of mind over mat. And honestly, the benefits are kind of unexpected.
That's absolutely right. I mean, when you hear martial arts, the first thing that pops into most people's heads is the physical side, right? The kicks, the throws, self-defense. But what the research consistently shows us is that the mental game is just as crucial, maybe even more so. And not just for winning on the mat, but for, overall well-being in your day-to-day life. So we're going to explore these key psychological factors and uncover some surprising benefits for everyone, really, from beginners right up to the top athletes.
Okay, let's get into it. Let's start with two really big psychological concepts: emotional intelligence and anxiety. What are these studies telling us about how they actually show up in martial arts athletes?
All right, good place to start. So first, anxiety. We're talking about that feeling of unease, of worry, often kind of generalized. It's like an overreaction to something we see as intimidating, even if it isn't objectively threatening. Then there's emotional intelligence, EI. Think of it in three parts. First, emotional attention, basically, being aware of your own emotions. Second, emotional clarity, that's understanding what those emotions mean. And third, emotional repair, which is all about managing and regulating those emotions effectively.
Okay, and this is where, for me, it got really fascinating. The research points to some pretty stark differences between genders here. Female athletes, it seems, consistently reported higher anxiety levels, like across the board. The numbers were quite striking, something like 15% more anxiety overall compared to men. And in some cases, it was way higher, like 35% more total anxiety. And even drilling down into physiological anxiety, the physical symptoms, heart racing, that kind of thing, and motor anxiety, worrying about movement. Both were around 60% higher for women. That's a lot.
It is a significant difference. But, and this is the really interesting twist, despite feeling that higher anxiety, female athletes also showed superior emotional attention. Their results were about 10% better in that specific area.
Okay, wait. So higher anxiety, but also better attention to their emotions. What does that suggest? How do those two things fit together?
Well, it suggests maybe a different way of processing emotions, doesn't it? It's like while women might experience the sensation of anxiety more intensely, they're also potentially more tuned into those emotional signals, like having a more sensitive internal radar for feelings. And, that's not necessarily a negative. It could actually be a unique starting point for developing really good emotional regulation skills, better self-awareness right from the get-go.
That's a really interesting way to frame it. Okay, so how does this picture change as athletes get more experienced? Does the anxiety just fade away, or is it more about managing it differently at, say, the elite level?
It seems to be more about management and development. The studies found that higher-level athletes, regardless of gender, consistently showed significantly lower anxiety, and at the same time, higher emotional intelligence, particularly in those areas of emotional clarity and emotional repair.
So understanding and managing emotions better.
Exactly. High-level athletes had roughly 40% less total anxiety compared to the lower-level group, and about 10% more clarity and repair.
Wow.
Yeah, so it really points to this powerful inverse relationship. As expertise grows, anxiety tends to decrease, and these emotional skills increase. It strongly suggests that developing these abilities, understanding your emotions, managing them, isn't just helpful, it's actually crucial for reaching that top tier in athletics. They're not just physically superior, they're often emotionally more adept too.
And does the type of combat sport matter? Because the research hinted that grappling sports like judo or wrestling might come with higher anxiety than striking sports like karate or taekwondo. Is there something specific driving that?
Yes. The sources suggest a pretty specific reason. It comes down to the gripping time before the attack, especially in judo.
Oh, okay.
Think about it. You're in incredibly close physical contact. You're holding on to your opponent, feeling their balance, their tension, anticipating their moves, all before any major throw happens. This constant sort of intense interpersonal proximity seems to significantly increase what they call interpersonal anxiety.
Makes sense.
So yeah, grappling athletes tend to show maybe 30% higher interpersonal anxiety compared to striking athletes. It's a real defining feature of those styles. It's like a physical chess match happening at point-blank range.
That makes total sense. So given that, what are the practical takeaways? If you're in one of these grappling arts, what can actually help manage that heightened anxiety?
Well, the clear implication is the need for targeted strategies, right, to reduce that anxiety, but also, crucially, to build emotional intelligence. And these strategies need to consider things like gender differences and the athlete's experience level. The studies actually point to practices already common in many martial arts, things like meditation or performing kata, those structured sequences of movements. These can be really effective coping strategies, especially for beginners or lower-level competitors, to help reduce stress and anxiety. They're not just physical drills, they're mental conditioning.
Right, not just warm-ups. Okay, so shifting gears a bit, let's move beyond the immediate pressures of competition and look at the broader, maybe longer-term psychological picture. The studies seem pretty positive about personality traits, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. The findings are quite consistent there. Martial artists, particularly in judo and karate, tend to score higher on the positive traits within the Big Five personality model. For instance, high scores in openness. That reflects adaptability, curiosity, maybe appreciating the philosophical side of things. Then conscientiousness is usually high too. That's your discipline, organization, sense of duty. Which makes sense given the self-reliance needed, but also the cooperation with partners.
Yeah.
Extroversion scores tend to be higher as well. Things like being confident, sociable, probably influenced by all that close physical interaction. And finally, agreeableness. That's about trust, altruism. And you have to trust your training partners in these arts, right? For safety.
Definitely. So it seems like martial arts really help build up these positive aspects. What about the other side of the coin? The trait often seen as more negative, like neuroticism.
Yeah, interestingly, neuroticism, which is linked to things like anxiety, emotional instability, maybe lower self-confidence, tends to be significantly lower among these martial artists. The score mentioned was around 19.8 compared to what you might expect. And this fits with other observations that top champions often score lower on neuroticism. It suggests that discipline and focus involved really help moderate those tendencies.
And this isn't just about personality shaping. It links directly to mental health outcomes, too.
Without a doubt. The data shows martial artists having notably lower levels of both anxiety and depression compared to, say, general population norms used in the Italian studies. Their anxiety score was around 5.9 compared to a norm of 7.9, and depression was even lower, like 3.7 versus 5.5. Especially depression showed a big difference.
Wow.
The researchers suggest it's this combination of the work on personal self and personal growth that's inherent in the practice, plus the consistent positive social interaction you get in training. It's addressing well-being from multiple angles.
That really highlights the holistic nature of it. It's clearly not just about winning or losing fights. It's about developing the whole person.
Exactly. And you see organizations like the All Japan Judo Federation, the AJJF, really leaning into this now. They've put out these long-term development guidelines. Their stated aim is promoting healthy, lifelong development of mind and body through judo.
That's a really important evolution. So, okay, we've seen the general well-being benefits. What about the specific psychological tools athletes develop to handle the pressures of competition? We hear the term mental toughness thrown around a lot.
Yes, mental toughness. There's really central concept in sports psychology. It's essentially that psychological edge. You know, the thing that helps athletes perform consistently at a high level, especially under pressure. It includes things like motivation, coping skills, concentration, confidence. It's often seen as what separates the really good athletes from the truly excellent ones.
Right. And the research actually identified some specific universal attributes for judo athletes that build this toughness.
That's right. 6 key attributes came up consistently in the studies on judoka. First, emotional regulation, that critical skill of managing useless thoughts and negative feelings that can really sabotage performance. Then, resilience, being able to bounce back from setbacks. Self-confidence, that solid belief in your abilities. Attention regulation, so staying focused, blocking out distractions. Self-motivation, that internal drive to keep pushing. And optimism, maintaining a positive outlook.
Okay, those make sense across many sports.
Yes, but then there was one attribute highlighted as particularly unique or emphasized in judo, combativity.
Combativity. Tell me more about that.
It was described as an aggressive fighting style, really focused on dominating the opponent physically and tactically. It's about constantly pressing the action, taking the initiative, dictating the pace.
That fits so well with judo, doesn't it? That constant struggle for control, for the grip, for position. Okay. But is there a broader concept that maybe encompasses several of these elements, something like psychological capital?
Yes, psychological capital, or PsyCap. That's a really useful construct here.
Yeah.
It brings together 4 key positive psychological resources: hope, optimism, resilience, and self-efficacy, which is your belief in your own ability to succeed in specific situations. The research identifies PsyCap as a really significant factor in mitigating the negative effects of sport anxiety and enhancing performance. And what's really empowering about PsyCap is that it's considered malleable. It's not fixed. It can actually be developed through specific training and interventions.
So you can build it up.
Exactly. It acts like a buffer against that performance anxiety, ultimately helping to improve results.
This suggests something interesting about tension, then. Maybe it's not always the enemy if you have the right psychological toolkit.
Precisely. And this leads to a finding that might seem a bit counterintuitive at first. One of the sources pointed out that the higher the tension, the higher the self-management, and the higher the sport's coping skills.
Wait, higher tension leads to better coping. How does that work?
It implies that in a sport like judo, which is inherently high tension, developing strong self-management skills is absolutely paramount. It's almost like that tension acts as a catalyst. If you have the skills, you can learn to convert that tension into more effective coping rather than letting it overwhelm you. It forces you to develop those skills.
That's a critical point for anyone in a high-stakes environment. So, practically speaking, how do athletes build this mental strength? What strategies did the sources suggest?
Several concrete strategies came up. Effective goal setting is one, making sure goals are realistic, measurable, time-bound. Developing pre-competition routines was another key one. Standardized warm-ups help manage stress and stop your mind from, ruminating on worries.
Right, get in the zone.
Exactly. Deep breathing techniques were highlighted as very successful for regulating emotional reactions. Simple, but powerful. Using positive self-talk and visualization is also important for maintaining that constructive mindset. And of course, honing focus and concentration, really learning to stay present, playing in the here and now. One other interesting suggestion was actually training emotion regulation in high-stress environments. So deliberately simulating competition intensity in training, maybe by adding cognitive tasks right after intense physical effort.
Oh, interesting, like stress inoculation.
Kind of, yeah. And finally, the coach's role is absolutely crucial here, helping athletes find their optimal stress level, understand their emotions, and really take ownership of their goals.
These lessons learned on the mat, they often seem to bleed into life off the mat in really profound ways. There was that personal account from Cedric Chin you mentioned earlier.
Yes, Cedric Chin's insight was really striking. He said, "Who you are on the mats is who you are off the mats."
Yeah.
He talked about how his coach pointed out that his main problem in judo wasn't actually about skill, but about will.
Will, not skill. Okay.
Chin realized his own resistance to discomfort in judo, whether it was like struggling with a specific throw or the difficulty of cutting rate, directly mirrored how he avoided taking necessary risks in his business life. He kept looking for an easier technique or strategy, when the real issue was his unwillingness to just buckle down and push through the uncomfortable parts using the skills he already had.
That feeling of being uncomfortable with discomfort, I think a lot of people can relate to that. So how did he tackle that? How did he change that pattern?
His coach gave him a very practical technique. He consciously regulated his body language to project the mental state he wanted to have. So even when exhausted or frustrated, he had to force himself to stand tall, look eager, get up quickly after being thrown, basically act like he was ready and unfazed.
Take it till you make it, almost.
In a way, yes. That external display started to reshape his internal perception. It helped him confront and overcome that discomfort, and that change rippled out, impacting his approach not just to judo, but to challenges in his business and life as well. Acting the part helped him become the part.
That's a really powerful example of the mind-body connection. Now, speaking of the mental side, There seems to be a bit of a debate, or at least differing views, on formal psychological support in sports.
Yes, there definitely are contrasting perspectives. On one hand, you have someone like Teddy Riner, the French judo legend, multiple Olympic and world titles. He's a vocal advocate for normalizing mental health support. He even suggests using terms like mental coach to make it sound less clinical, perhaps. He himself has worked with a psychologist since he was 14, seeing it as essential to his success.
Okay, so he fully embraces it.
Fully. Then on the other end of the spectrum, you might hear from someone like, say, John Danaher, a highly respected Brazilian jiu-jitsu coach. He's been quoted dismissing sports psychology, sometimes quite strongly, calling it a scam industry. His argument is that genuine confidence doesn't come from talk or therapy. It comes from actual, repeated, hard-won success in training and sparring.
So, two very different takes. Given everything we've discussed from the research, where does the evidence seem to lean?
Well, the overwhelming consensus from the studies we've looked at really supports Teddy Riner's view. The research clearly shows that things like psychological capital, mental skills training, they are effective. They do make a difference. We saw evidence that even introductory judo training can have a substantial and robust impact on psychological resilience and improve self-control, even in people who were previously sedentary.
So the benefits are measurable even early on.
Exactly. It's not just anecdotal. The data suggests these interventions work.
And importantly, this isn't just a conversation about elite athletes aiming for medals, is it? That AJJF framework you mentioned earlier points towards something much broader.
Absolutely. The AJJF's long-term development guidelines really lay out a vision for lifelong participation. They have these 6 stages, starting right from early childhood, like 0 to 5 years old, focusing on discovering joy and pleasure in movement and judo. And it goes all the way through to a lifelong stage focused on achieving a good social state as well as being healthy both mentally and physically.
So cradle to grave, almost.
Pretty much. And they specifically emphasize considering individual differences, developmental pace, gender, disabilities. They're even actively looking into new values in judo, specifically for middle-aged and older adults. Things like how judo can help maintain health, prevent falls, maybe even help with things like frailty or dementia prevention. It's about judo as a tool for well-being across the entire lifespan.
Wow. You know, listening to all this, it really drives home that martial arts, judo especially, are so much more than just learning to fight or defend yourself. They truly are these incredible environments for developing your mind, your emotions. The tools seem so relevant to everything in life.
Definitely. We've seen how these practices can genuinely help reduce anxiety, foster those positive personality traits like conscientiousness and openness, build that crucial mental toughness, and even provide this framework of psychological capital, hope, optimism, resilience, self-efficacy that acts as a buffer against all kinds of stressors, whether you're on the mat or dealing with challenges at work or home, is really quite profound.
Yeah, and hearing the perspectives from elite athletes like Reiner who integrate mental coaching, alongside personal stories like Chin's where the lessons directly transferred to business, it just highlights how powerful this mental conditioning can be.
It really does. And the fact that major organizations like the AJJF are pushing for this lifelong holistic view means these aren't just benefits for a select few. The potential is there for everyone, no matter your age, your physical condition, or whether you ever plan to compete. It offers a pathway to resilience and well-being for potentially anyone.
So maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to take away from this deep dive. Consider that idea. Who you are on the mats is who you are off the mats. If that holds true, what's one small, consistent mental discipline maybe inspired by what we've talked about today, like noticing your emotions, consciously choosing your body language, or just pushing through a tiny bit of discomfort that you could start practicing? Something that might not only help with an immediate challenge, but could, over time, actually reshape your whole approach to navigating life's inevitable battles. Something to think about.
Next time on the Judo Science Podcast, episode 20, Boosting Judo Performance, the impact of anaerobic training.